What is knitting? If I were to ask you to explain knitting in a few words, what would you say? While you're thinking about that, I'll tell you what I think knitting is. Knitting is a loop going through a loop. And in fact, you might say it's a lot of loops going through a lot of loops, and the loops are kept live. Now, how do you get the yarn to go from yarn to a loop, and how do you pull it through a loop? Well, there are lots of ways of doing it, but I'm going to show you the basic knit stitch and the basic purl stitch. Here is a knit stitch. It's already knit. And as you can see, there is a right side of the loop and a left side of the loop. When the knit stitch is properly mounted on the left needle, the right side of the loop is on the front of the needle. If the left side were on the front, this is an improper mount, although you will meet knitters who like to knit with the yarn that way. But we are going to learn with the right side of the loop on the front of the needle. Now, to make this go through as a loop, I have to open up the loop on the left needle. There are 4 ways for me to take the tip of the right needle and open up that loop. The first way, and the way you'll use most, is to take the right needle and go from front to back. That's the number 1 way. The number 2 way would be to take the right needle and go from back to the front. That would be the number 2 way, and you will use it when you purl. However, you can also enter the loop on the left needle through the back of the loop and go to the back. We'll call that the number 3 way. And you can take the right tip of the right needle and go through the back loop and bring it to the front, which is the 4th way. Now, I will tell you that number 3 and 4 are legitimate ways of knitting for certain effects, but not used very much. When you need to use them, you can, but for our basic knitting, we will take the right needle, go from front to back. I will take the yarn, put it under and over the right needle, and pull that through. There, I have turned the yarn into a loop, and that loop is going through a loop. Wasn't that fun? I've knit 1 stitch, I'll do it again. Tip of the right needle from front to back. Remember, that's the first way we said, front to back. Take the yarn, go under and over, bring the tip of the needle back through the original loop that you were going through, take that off the needle, and there's a second knit stitch. What happens to our loop on the left needle as we knit? Let's follow that this time. Front to back, here's our new loop forming. There's our new loop right here. As we let that loop from the left needle go from the previous round, it forms a bump going to the back of the needle. I'll do it again. Front to back, wrap it around. Here's our new loop, off with the old. The bump goes to the back. Let's take a look at the back of the knitting. Look at all those bumps. Those are all the tops of the loops as we knit our new loop. So again, here it is. Go from front to back, wrap the yarn around, bring in the new loop. Here's our brand new loop, off with the old. Now, there are certainly much more efficient ways to knit than what I've demonstrated. And you can look on our video, Norwegian Knitting and Purling, to learn that. I won't talk about that here. For now, you just need to know that to get the knit stitch, you go from front to back. The yarn goes under and over the right needle. You bring the new loop through the old loop. Here's your new loop, there's your old. All right, now what would it be like if we wanted to make the bump come to the front? Instead of all those bumps going to the back, how can we get the bump to come to the front? Well, this is what we call purling. Let's take our yarn and bring it to the front between the needles. Now notice, I'm not going over the needle. I'm not wrapping around the needles. I'm not doing anything except simply bringing it between the needles, and now the yarn is in front. Now I will enter the stitch on the left needle in the second way I showed you, go from back to front. So we have yarn in front, needle to the front, take my yarn, wrap it around the front of the needle, and I will go out the old loop, this loop that's on the left needle, and I will let that loop go. And there is my bump to the front. If I get that yarn out of the way, you can very clearly see a bump in the front. If I do it again, I'll get another bump. The yarn is in the front, the needle is in the front. I'm going to wrap around the front, and I'm going to get out of that loop by backing out. There's my new loop. There's my old loop falling to the front. I'll do another purl. Yarn in the front, needle in front, wrap around the front, out the back. Now suppose I wanted to knit a couple stitches. I would take the yarn and I would go between the needles to the back. Now notice I said between. I didn't say go over the needle. I didn't say go under the needle. I didn't say go around the needle. I take the yarn from the front, go in between the needles, and go to the back. So yes, I am going under the right needle, you could say. All right, now I'll knit a couple stitches. Go from front to back, wrap the yarn around. There's my new loop, off with the old. I'll knit a couple, and then I'll purl a couple. Bring the yarn to the front between the needles, wrap around. Okay, now really, as you can see, what I'm doing is quite inefficient. I'll just give you a little taste of the Norwegian knitting and purling, and you can look it up. When I do Norwegian knitting, I have the yarn, I open up the loop, I wrap it around, I bring it through. It's much more efficient than what I was showing you earlier. And if I wanted to purl, I would actually do the same thing. You'll have to check the video for that, but there's my purls. I'm doing all the steps I showed you, bringing the yarn to the front, the needle to the front, I'm wrapping around the front, I'm going out the back. Here's my purls. All right, I'll knit a couple, and then I will show you how to unknit. It may happen as you knit, get this out of the way, as you pursue your knitting life, which, you know, will become your life if you're not careful, or if you are careful and that's what you want. You might find that you make a mistake and you have to unknit. So you're knitting a certain design and you say all the way back here, oh, I purled 3 and I should have knit 3. So you have to go all the way back there because your whole design has been messed up. No matter what your hand you hold the yarn in, to unknit, hold the yarn in your left hand and let it be very taut. When I hold that yarn very firmly, I create a definite hole in the row below the stitch on the right needle. I'm going to take my left needle, go from front to back. There, I've rescued the old stitch, the old loop, you might say, and I'm going to let that new one out of the needle. Okay, again, I hold it so firmly, I see a hole. I go from front to back, and I pull that out. Now, as this yarn gets longer, I just use my finger for a bobbin, hold firmly. There's the hole, go from front to back, and I've reclaimed my old stitch. All right, now as the more you do it, you might have to unwind your left forefinger. All right, now look, we're coming to some purls. I wonder how we're going to unpurl. Let's find out. Okay, here's an unknit. All right, now here's a purl. How will I unpurl? You'll be very happy to find out. You unpurl the same way you unknit. Hold that yarn firmly. There's the hole. Put the left needle in from front to back and unpurl. It's actually the same as unknitting. As long as you hold that yarn so firmly you can see a hole, then there it is. So unpurling and unknitting are actually the same process. Okay, now I'll unknit a couple. See, as long as I'm holding that very firmly. Now you might ask the question, why do I have to go from front to back? Why am I going from front to back? Why can't I pick it up from back to front? That'll get the stitch on the needle, and yes, it does. But look what happened. When I went from back to front, that stitch on the needle is incorrectly mounted. See the left side of the loop? It's on the front. So I'd have to fix it. Instead of having to fix it by doing it wrong, just go from front to back and you will automatically get it correct. Even an unpurl, if you went on unpurl from back to front, you would get the stitch incorrectly mounted, you would want to mount it. So to unknit and to unpurl, you just hold the yarn firmly, put the left needle from front to back, and let the old stitch off the needle. And if your yarn gets too much on your left forefinger, start again. Okay, you should be as good as knitting at unknitting as you are at knitting. Now the reason I'm good is not because I've made all those mistakes, but I'll tell you, my beginners, they bring their knitting to me, and the amount of unknitting I have to do for them, no, I'm just kidding. I make a lot of mistakes and I unknit and I fix them, and that's why I'm good at unknitting. And you too can be good at unknitting. There's nothing to be afraid of. Be good at it. If you knit it, you should be able to unknit it. So practice your unknitting and your unpurling, and take care of your mistakes.